Don't start the lab, no, but you can get logged in. Go to 1911-01. If you can't find it by scrolling around, there's a search bar at the top. You can actually use the search bar to search for it. It's 1911-01. This session is being live streamed, so I'm using the mic. Normally I don't use the mic. So we're going to have people following along in the home game. Are we live streaming yet, Sandy? We are now live streaming. Welcome. So welcome to the What's New in Vsphere 6.7 workshop. As you can see, we got a full house here in Las Vegas, and we are actually live streaming this today, so we're going to have people playing along at home. This lab is the only lab that's in VMworld's catalog that's actually already out in the public labs.hol.vmware.com. So if you wanted to take this lab, we have a whole bunch of videos in this lab that we're not going to cover in this workshop. You guys can watch the videos on your own time. We're here to be adding extra value to you guys here in the expert-led workshops. With me, I've got Tim Sandy, Senior Solutions Engineer, and I've got Corey at the back over here. Corey's been a good proctor here all week, so he's here to help you guys. If you need any questions, this is a totally interactive session. If there's not very many questions, we can just go through the lab and click, next, but it'll be the same as doing it out there. So we're here. Tim and I are part of the content developers for the 1911 series of labs. I built the underlying infrastructure for 1911 series of labs, so all the Vsphere 6.7 infrastructure that went into these pods. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So we'll talk about the team. Julie Roman, who couldn't be here today, she got pulled into a customer event that she needed to be at. She was the person who actually developed the lab itself. So John Schulman, Jarrett Blandon are kind of our architects, and I was the lab captain that developed the pod. Tim did all of the security components, and part of the module in here is his baby as well, so that's why he's here today. So hopefully we get some good value out of this. So basically, our lab development cycle, so we have over 80 labs out there, and there's about 60 lab captains that we all develop all the content that you're seeing in the hands-on labs. So we spent probably between 80 and 100 hours each developing lab content for you guys to consume, not just here at VMworld, but also out in labs.hol.vmware.com. So you'll notice our lab is 19. That means this lab is going to live until 2019. So basically, we've got a lab that's going to go for a year. This will be available publicly, so it's a great place for you guys to go out and train. And one thing to note, all of our labs are live working environments. So inside of this lab, we have 2 vCenters. We have 5 ESXi hosts. We have Operations Manager. We have Log Insight. We have high-trust key management servers. We've got a few other support VMs underneath. We've got a virtual router, and we've got a free NAS storage device. But it's all a nested environment. So we've got about 40, 45 people in the room. Each one of you has about a terabyte of storage, about 100 gigs of RAM, and about 30 VMs or so that are running in the background. One thing to note, Monday, we introduced Vsphere Update 1. Pretty important milestone for us because all of our customers seem to like to wait till update 1 to start migrating. How many people in the room are on 6.7 today? Wow. I usually get 1 or 2. So usually someone's running in the lab. So the question is, what are you guys doing here? You should be migrating. I mean, September 19th is the day for our end of general support for 5.5. Yeah. One of the things to note for you 5.5 folks, you will have a 2-stage upgrade to get to 6.7. So you're going to need to move to either 6.0 or 6.5 to move to 6.7 using our migration tool. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those sorts of things as well. But the biggest thing to note in Vsphere 6.7 Update 1 is fully featured HTML5 client. Yay! Hey, we got some, nobody applauded. We have some applauding. How many of you have used the HTML5 interface in Vsphere 6.5? And do you like it better than Flash? Yay, I do. It's way faster. I don't have anywhere near as many crashes of my infrastructure because of Flash being so resource intensive as well on the back end, so that's great. So we've made tremendous advancements in the HTML5 interface. One thing to note, the HTML5 interface, and we'll get to this a bit, is consistent now across most of our products. So we use something called the Clarity UI, which is our user design interface. So we are trying to make that consistent across all of VMware's products. So whether you're using vSphere, vRealize Operations Manager, automation, or even our cloud products, they're all going to have a consistent interface so that you can look at it and go, hey, I already think I know how to use this, which is quite frankly, something we should be doing long ago. But we're doing it now, and I think that's great. The other thing is, from a Vcenter server Converge tool, how many of you are running external PSEs today? So we got a few people running external PSEs. So the reason that we kind of went from an embedded PSE now to an external PSE, and with vSphere 6.7, we've swung back to an embedded PSE model. Part of it was we just couldn't scale that SSO transaction limit big enough, so we spun that out externally. Now that we have scalability inside that appliance, we're now bringing it back. In the original version of 6.7, we couldn't actually take an external PSE and migrate it back to an embedded PSE. So we've actually added a Vcenter Converge tool that will allow you to do that. So whether or not you have an external PSE behind load balancers or not, you can now use the merge tool and combine it back and bring it back into an embedded one. Tim, you got anything to add on embedded PSEs and enhanced link mode? Thanks, Tim. No, that's great information.
One other thing real quick. Is there anybody that's not on 6.5 right now, that's on a previous version, that is planning to go to 6.5 before going to 6.7? Or is there anybody that's going to be doing kind of that gradual stepping up of version? The reason I ask is because I did this particular lab last year, so if you're on the public facing side, the lab is 18.11.01. So I just want to bring it up that if you are looking to go to 6.5 first and use that for a while before going to 6.7, if you're looking to see the kind of what's new with 6.5, that lab is still available on the public facing side. It's just the same number, just 18.11 instead. So.
Yeah. Good to note. For the folks at home, there is a 6.5 version of this as well. It's 1811-01, and it's available at labs.hol.vmware.com. A couple of the other things that are in Update 1, the Enhanced Content Library. In the current release, we cannot import OVAs, and you cannot directly deploy a template from inside a content library. In Update 1, we can now have OVAs inside the content library, and we can also start deploying templates directly from the content library. So a little bit an easier manage. Thank you. Excellent. How many people are running VDI with high performance? VDI today with NVIDIA Grid. You'll like the next one because we can now vMotion between NVIDIA Grid enabled vSphere hosts. So now we can vMotion across a working workload that's on NVIDIA Grid. So we're going to get into the hands-on lab. If you haven't already logged in, let's get it logged in. We're going to be right here at the lab URL. You want to make sure that you're running 1911-01-SDDC. If you're at home, you can find this in the labs.hol.vmware catalog. We're going to start the lab right now and get going. So you can just click on Start This Lab. And the first thing I want you guys to do is once we get the lab started up, I want to, up here at the top, I want to have this extend button. I want to make sure once we get a time remaining, I want you to hit that extend button twice. I've had a couple of people time out their labs because we were talking and having a great interaction, all of a sudden their lab ended because they were inactive and they ran out of time. So you should see a loading console and a Windows console. So as you can see, I've got 59 minutes left. I'm going to hit extend, and then I'm going to hit extend again. We should have now an hour and 30 minutes. One thing to note, down at the bottom over here, we have the lab status. The lab status should be green, and it should say ready. If someone does not see green and it does not say ready, put up your hand and we'll have a look at that lab for you. What does yours say? Connecting vCenters. So does anyone have one that says fail or timeout? No? Okay. If it's in the middle of what we have a lab startup check. What we do is we pre-populate these labs and kind of warm them up and start. We might have had a few where we get collisions where we haven't had a start. So we're going to give those ones a couple of minutes. But I'm going to go through and do a little bit of a tour of the HTML5 interface. So before we get you guys doing stuff, it's fine, we can wait. If it doesn't go green by about another 5 or 6 minutes, let us know and we'll have you quit out and come back in and start up another lab and we'll get a fresh one for you. So I'm going to do a quick overview of what's new in the HTML5 interface for all of you. To log into that, we're going to go into Chrome, and it's automatically going to go to our VCSA 01A. So that's our vCenter Server Appliance 01A. We have it at 01B, which is on our secondary site. To stop from having to log in all the time, I've enabled Windows Session Authentication. So you can just click on that button right here for Session Authentication and click Login, and that will log us in with the administrator at corp.local account. What I'd like to do is just kind of walk you through what this Vsphere client looks like. Now, we didn't get the Update 1 code in here, so we do not have the Update 1 code. We're still running the general release of Vsphere 6.7 in the lab. In a future release of this, we'll update this to include Update 1. But this is going to give you a good idea of what we've got in terms of the menu options. So right when we logged in, we were going to where we were last, but I'm going to start at the Home button. So if you guys want to just click on the Home button, and I really don't like the resolution that we've been limited to in the lab, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my screen resolution to 1280. So you can do that here. That way we can see way more. Just click Apply. Come on. Ours has to be slow when I'm demoing, doesn't it? Uh-oh. There we go. Keep changes. All right, so if you're at 1280 by 800, we now have a much better resolution. We can see more. The other thing I like to do is I'll maximize this window so we can see more of the screen real estate. Can everybody see on the monitor up here? Is that okay? Can we see? Is it clear? Yeah, it's good? Okay. So as you can see, we kind of have almost like a VROP style dashboard at the home menu. It's going to give us an idea of what our resources look like in the lab, CPU, memory, storage. Are we green? Are we yellow? Are we red? Those sorts of things. As well, it's going to tell us all about the VMs and the hosts. We also get objects with alerts. The one thing I like is we also know what plugins we've got installed. So if you've got some third-party plugins and you don't know what your storage plugin's called, or maybe you have HP OneView or something like that, this is where you can see a list of all your plugins that are in there. Shortcuts should look remarkably familiar. We haven't really changed the look of shortcuts, but if you were in the HTML5 client in 6.5, you would notice this shortcut list would be remarkably smaller. We didn't have Update Manager. You were probably missing storage and networking. You didn't have your host profiles in there, all of the VM customization stuff. So we've really brought this up to the feature parity with the Flash client. Still a few things that we don't have in here. vSphere high availability is not in Update 1, or it is in Update 1, but it's not in this version. So if you wanted to enable high availability for vCenters, that's a Flash client thing that you'll need to do. Quick Boot was the other thing that's in the Flash client. So that they are in U1, correct. And of course, since it came down this week, I haven't even had time to put it in my lab yet. So The general release of that, update 1, I believe, is sometime in September. Don't have an official date yet. So we'll just do a quick little walkthrough kind of down this tree and see what things look like. Hosts and clusters, you can see very quick, very fast. One thing to note, I've been in the scripting lab, so if you're using ESX Power CLI and you're doing scripting, in the Flash client, you would script something and it would take about 5 minutes for it to update and all the rest of it. It's immediate. If you make a change in Power CLI, you'll see it in the HTML5 client just like that. So that's one tremendous improvement that I've seen from just from a speed. When we go down, we can look at hosts and clusters, VMs and templates. All of those things look very familiar. We now have vSAN in here, so you can do all your vSAN management right inside here. Configuration, all of those sorts of things are all now built into the HTML5 client. One thing, how many people are running vRealize Operations Manager inside their environments? Oh, we got a good number of you. This is one exciting thing in 6.7. We're now taking a subset of vRealize Operations Manager and taking some of those dashboards and putting them right into vCenter. So that will allow some of your administrators who maybe don't need to have that full-featured experience that they might get in Operations Manager, some view into what's going on in the environment from a vRealize Operations Management. So as you can see, we have critical alerts. We've got a very similar dashboard at the top. One of the really interesting ones, am I running out of capacity? We can now see the trending on, am I running out of capacity for compute, for storage, and for memory? Maybe memory might be one we might be running out of. In the lab, we're very tight on memory. But the other nice thing is this what can be reclaimed area. So it takes some of those statistics about optimizing the environment, and we now can see that we can see if you're going to save CPUs. If you had 500, 600 VMs running in here, we'd see how many idle VMs that you've got and how many CPUs you can reclaim, how much memory you can save, how much storage you can reclaim. The other thing that we notice, are my clusters configuration for HA or are they balanced? We can see if you're with or without DRS. And we can also see what operating systems you might be running. So obviously in the lab, we're a little bit limited. We only have 2 VMs running at the moment. So it's not giving us a ton of information. But you can now see the power of what we're going to deliver through here. Update Manager. Obviously, Update Manager was not in the HTML5 client before. It should look very familiar to those in the Flash. It's Update Manager, and it's got everything you need in there. We'll run through more of Update Manager here in the lab, but I just wanted to give you a kind of what I call the harbor tour of what we've got here. Anyone have any questions on the HTML5 client? Good question. So the question was, how are the vendors doing with the plugins? I think our plugin architecture in 6.5 and 6.7 has been very well received by our vendors. They're much faster responding to getting those plugins. I'm not going to say they're all perfect and getting it out right away. You know, when update 1 hits the ground, do they have a compatible one? But the trailing one, it's much easier for them to develop plugins with our RESTful APIs. So we have a lab where you can actually see how plugins get built. 1911-07, and Lauren Delamere and I will be delivering a workshop on how you can build a plugin yourself if you really want to this afternoon. So that's something, if you want to see that, you can. Good question. And we have prizes for good questions. So if you haven't used the hands-on labs before, one of the great navigation tools that we have is the table of contents. And the table of contents means you can move around inside different modules very, very fast and very quickly inside the manual. Our hands-on lab infrastructure is built so that each module that you might want to take is independent. So if you want to start, you log in and you go, you know what, I don't want to do the overview. I just want to go right into the heart of the security stuff. So what we'll do is we can just click right on that comprehensive security, and we can see what's in there, but we can also see what we're talking about. VM encryption, you know, high trust servers, configuring Windows 10. We have a whole bunch of stuff in here that we can do. So modules are independent, so we will build on a module. So if you want to come in and start at module 1, go ahead. But if you want to skip straight to module 3, you can do that as well. And that's across all of our hands-on labs. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with Module 2, and we're going to kind of go through some of the things in Module 2, and particularly we're going to get started with Update Manager. So if you want to click on Module 2 and go click right to Getting Started with Update Manager, we're going to run through basically setting up a baseline to patch your ESXi hosts. So if we look up here, I should be on step 50 up in the upper right-hand corner. You can see I'm up in the step 50. We've already logged into the web client. If you haven't, please feel free to go and log into the web client. Again, use Windows Session Authentication. If it doesn't automatically pop up, you can go up to Region A and make sure you select the HTML5 client. You can do all of this in the Flash client. If you want to play at home and use the Flash client, go ahead. But that would be like, you know, driving last year's car model off the lot, right? We don't want to be doing that. One other thing to gain some screen space, if you want to zoom out and see more of the screen, you can. So this gives us a little bit better view as well. I like going down to about 80%. That gives me a great view of what I need, and I can see all of the shortcuts, inventory, all of that in one screen. So let's navigate to the Update Manager. Now we're going to select our secondary vCenter server. So we're going to select VCS01B for this particular portion of the lab. And again, if you had 15 vCenters, you can do that. One thing to note is baselines are not, there's no place to export a baseline in the GUI, but there is a power CLI command where you can export the baseline, so that if you had a baseline and you wanted to move it from vCenter 1, 2, 3, 4 and have the same baseline across all of them, you can do that. You're just going to have to do it with a power CLI command. We have put in a feature request for that. So we're going to click on Baselines, and we're going to add a new baseline. And again, baselines can be upgrades, they can be extensions, or they can be patch baselines. Basically, and a baseline can be a collection of one or more patches. It can be an extension where you might be adding a specific vSphere VIB. All those sorts of things can be done with these, and then you can make sure that hosts are compliant with these baselines. And again, you can have multiple baselines, and they're cumulative. So I can have 2 or 3 baselines attached to a host, maybe one's for host patches, maybe one's for VMware tools or something along those lines, and they would be cumulative. So we'll name this HOL host baseline. One thing to note, if we are copying and pasting from the manual into the lab environment, we can actually highlight it in the manual, and we can drag and we can drop it across. It will start typing it out. Now note, it will start typing it out slowly, and if you're really fast and you switch context to a different window, it'll start finishing typing that in the new window. So be a little patient. In this particular lab, we don't have long strings, but in my code one, it can be a challenge. It likes to drop dashes for some reason too. So again, we're now going to, under the description type, we are going to, if you scroll down, oh, whoops, HOL description type, we're going to call it host baseline. And we're going to select patch. So we want this one to be a patch baseline. Now, when we look at the criteria is quite interesting because I can actually filter out the criteria for these patches. If I just want to maybe have these as a host patch, maybe for a host ISO from one of our hardware vendors, I could filter out on the patch vendor. I could also say, only show me the patches for 6.5. This lab isn't connected to the internet, so the database never got updated. So this is the default database, so you notice we're missing embedded ESX 6.7 patches, which isn't a concern right now for the lab, but in your environment, we would download all of the updates that you would get through Update Manager. So we're just going to select next because we want to have all of them. If we go back and we did filter, right now we have 172 matched. If I said, only show me the critical ones, we only have 38. And now I can select the different patches manually if I want, but I'm just going to select them all. Oops, next. So now you see we've got a host baseline here. And now we want to apply it to one of our hosts. So we'll go up to hosts and clusters. You can either do it on the side, or you can go to the menu and select hosts and clusters. Now we're going to make sure we select a host in region B, because that's where we created the baseline. Again, if you're in the A side, you won't see the baseline, because we created it in B. So you'll want to make sure we select either O1 or O2B. In the lab manual, it tells you to go to ESX O1B, so we'll follow right along. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on it. And we're going to click on the Updates tab. And we're going to click on the Attach button. And this is how we attach all of the baselines. You'll notice now we show two other ones in here. These are the default dynamic baselines that are created automatically. So you didn't see them in our baselines, but they're automatically created. So there's non-critical host patches and critical host patches that are automatically created. So you can apply those two if you want, if you don't want to create your own. We're going to apply the host baseline. And right now you see our compliance is unknown. So this will automatically run, but if we want to check it right away, we can either hit check compliance or we can hit the little refresh button. I'll just hit check compliance. And now it should tell us whether or not this host is compliant. And again, we may have to refresh it. And you'll notice now we're compliant. Does everybody here use Update Manager? Is there anyone not using Update Manager? Do they like patching their host manually? I love that. Auto deploy. Auto deploy is another great way to do it. So you basically just flush the host and re-image it. That works too. If you want to see a video of how we upgrade the hosts by using Update Manager, you can watch the video that's here in the lab. We talked a bit about embedded link mode, so I won't go through that at this moment in time. And that's basically module 2. What I want to go through now is basically our module 3, which we talk about security. And what I'm going to do is this module is built by Tim here, over here. So maybe I'll have him come and I'll have him walk us through this one. Come on down, Tim.
So in our lab environment here, we chose to use high trust KMS servers to enable our encryption with Vcenter. Now, there are multiple vendors out there that you can use that offer KMS servers for, as far as a compatibility aspect, anything that's KMIP 1.1 compliant basically is on our compatibility list from a Vsphere encryption standpoint. So again, we're using 2 KMS servers. And what we do in the steps here is we're going to add both of the KMS servers. We're going to create a trust between the Vcenter server and the KMS servers. And then what we're going to do is just quickly walk you through encrypting a VM and decrypting a VM. Pretty simple. There's not much to it, but there are some little caveats along the way when you're creating that trust between the Vcenter and the KMS server, though. So, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start off, and I believe we start in O1A. Go ahead and forward it. Yeah, we start in region A. Okay, so we're already logged in, and what we're going to do is we're going to click on the Vcenter server O1A, and then we're going to go to Configure, and then you'll see under More, you're going to see the Key Management Server in the Vcenter server. Does everybody see that? Okay, now keep in mind, when we're going through the step, where we go and select a certificate, that basically what we've done is on the KMS, each one of the individual KMS servers, we created an account and then we've downloaded the associated certificate for that. So when we're creating this trust relationship between vCenter and the KMS server, you need to make sure that, and I'll say it again, point it out when we get there, but we need to make sure that you're going into the correct folder that it's associated with the vCenter server and the KMS server to make sure that we're getting that right certificate. But I'll explain that a little bit more. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and click Add to add the KMS server. I'll let you catch up. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, we get this pop-up that says Add KMS. We're going ahead and create a new, essentially a KMS cluster. So then what we're going to do for the new cluster name, we're just going to call it HOL-KMS-01A because we're currently working on the 01A vCenter server. Okay, we're going to leave the checkbox to make sure that that is the default cluster when it comes up. And then as he just showed you here, now this is just, in the server name field, this is just really a display name, okay? So you can kind of call it what you want that's appropriate. But I just did KMS-01A. But now for the server address, this is really important that you make sure you double check when you copy and paste it over, which is the easiest way. Just double check, make sure you don't have any extra spaces or anything like that has dropped off when you copy and paste it over. Because obviously if this fully qualified domain name is wrong, obviously we're not going to be able to communicate with the KMS and create a trust. Then the server port is going to be 5696. That's the default port that's used. And then you're going to click Add. And we see we get this pop-up here about making vCenter trust KMS. And we have the button Trust. Now, one thing I like to point out, because it can be a little deceiving, we're creating this trust between the vCenter server and the KMS server. However, when we click Trust here, we're only kind of completing half of that process of the trust. And you'll see here in a second, we're going to go through and we have to actually finish it. So it can be a little deceiving with that button saying Trust. But we're going to go ahead and click that. Now, once we do that, you're going to see the status. You may have to use the scroll bar to scroll all the way over to the right. But you should see there under KMS certificate status, you should have a green check mark and saying that's valid. Does anybody not have that? Typically, just to let you know, if it doesn't turn green and you don't get that it's valid, typically it's because either the port or the FQDN of the KMS server is incorrect. Either you might have put a space in there, or incorrect character or something like that. Usually that's the cause of it. Everybody got a green check mark? Good, awesome. Okay, now what we're going to do is, as he did, we're going to select that KMS server in the left there in that radius button, and then you're going to see the Make KMS Trust vCenter underneath.
If they don't see it,
Gotcha. It should automatically open that up when they click on the radius button, but yeah, if it doesn't, go ahead and click that. So once we do that, we're going to go ahead and select the KMS certificate and the private key selection. And what we're essentially doing is we're importing the certificate from the KMS server and finishing that trust relationship. Then you click Next. Now here's the part you need to be careful about. Okay, remember we're on the vCenter 01A and we're using KMS server 01A. So go ahead and click the upload file. And what you want to do is, Windows always takes you back to the previous file level, whatever you used last. So as you can see here, we're in the 01B, but we need to be in the 01A. So you need to go up one level and then select the 01A folder.
it's
Yeah, KMIP.
01A is the folder we're
Yes.
going in.
Everybody see that folder? Again, make sure you're on the 01A version. Then once you do that, you're going to select that bottom one, again, with the same KMIP name in the .pem file. Click OK. And then you're going to do the exact same thing on the bottom. I know it kind of doesn't make sense, but keep in mind this is a virtualized environment, so this isn't production. In production, you would really have two certificates, two different ones. But in this case, we're selecting that exact same PEM file. And once you do that, you click Establish Trust. Now at this point here, if you've done everything right, the certificate's good. Now we should see all three columns there have check marks in them, the green check marks, saying that it's connected, it's valid, and at that point in time is when we've completed that trust process where the trust is going both ways, from the KMS to the vCenter to the KMS. I'll let you catch up there. So basically what we're going to do now is we're going to go over to the core-01A VM that's under the 01A vCenter server. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry? Okay, now we're going to go to the O1B vCenter server, and we're going to add that secondary KMS server to the O1B vCenter. Exact same thing all over again, except for, again, it's the O1B side of the house. So the cluster name is going to be HOL-KMS-O1B this time. And again, this is just a display name, so keep that in mind. As well as here, the server name, I just put KMS-O1B. Then for the server address, again, we need to use a FQDN, so it's going to be the KMS-O1B.corp.local.
If you drag and drop this, it does add an extra space at the end for some reason. So
Yes, I've done this multiple times, obviously creating this lab, and there's many times that I messed this up because I was getting ahead of myself. Then again, the port number is 5696. Then we're going to click Add. Click Trust again. Then we're going to select that KMS server again and click the Make the KMS Trust vCenter. Is everybody up to this point? I don't want to get too ahead. Yeah, okay, we're going a little too fast here. I'll give you guys a minute to catch up. Is anybody currently using any type of encryption with Vsphere yet in their environments that's on 6.5 or 6.7? Got one person? Who are you using for your KMS, just out of curiosity? HITRUST, awesome, great. VMware actually owns, I think it's 10-15%, and we're on their board, so we have a kind of a vested interest. And the good thing about that is when we're involved like that in a third-party company that we're using for something like this, our integrations are always are done very well. So that's the benefit of us having an interest in HITRUST, and kind of why we're using them is, we have a great integration perspective here. So is everybody up to this point here? Anybody having any issues? Okay. So again, we're going to go ahead and select the KMS certificate and private key, upload the file. And again, this time we were just in O1A's folder, so now we need to go up one level, select O1B's folder this time. And once we click in there, again, that bottom PEM file, we're going to select that. Then click Open, and then we're going to do the exact same thing again. Yeah. Windows will always take you to the previous one that you've been in. Then we're going to go ahead and click Establish Trust, and then we'll want to verify that we're getting those 3 green check marks across the board. Okay, so at this point, what we've done is we've added 2 KMS servers, created the trust between the KMS servers and the vCenters, on one each on both of them. Anybody having troubles with that, or isn't up to this point yet of completing the second trust? Still working a little bit? Okay. Just as an FYI, in this particular lab, basically I did the 1911-04, which is a security lab. So obviously, since that lab is really based around security, I really focused in a lot on this encryption. So what I did is I actually go into, if you want to learn how to do power CLI commands to run to encrypt, decrypt, change what your default KMS server is, that lab does have that in there, but since this is kind of the what's new lab, basically we just put the user interface version only of how to encrypt and decrypt. So, but if you're looking to get a little more deeper into using the power CLI commands to be able to do any type of encryption or anything associated to that, you can go to the 1911-04 lab, and that's where the power CLI commands will be.
And there's several great resources if you are interested. How many are using power CLI today in the room? Number of you? Excellent resource. Probably every one of you that's doing scripting probably knows William Lamb and his Virtually Ghetto. Lots of great examples on what you can do with Power CLI and how you can extend that out to help manage and automate some tasks. We do also have a lab that focuses just on Power CLI. So 1911-05 also focuses right in on that Power CLI scripting and how you can help automate tasks within and inside vCenter to make your jobs easier.
Okay. So anybody not at the point where both their vCenters are trusted and have green check marks, everybody good to go? Okay. So now let's go ahead and we're going to actually encrypt a virtual machine. Oh,
for those
that's right,
at home.
this lab, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, let them know that we're on step 113.
Yeah, step 113. So actually what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the menu, and then we're going to policies and profiles. Then we're gonna click on the VM storage policies. And we're gonna see that we have a pre-configured encryption policy, VM encryption policy listed there. There's actually 2 of them, one for each vCenter. Then we're going to go down and click on the storage policy components on the left navigation pane. And then we're going to see those components for the encryption policy as well. And this is just to kind of point out some of this. You know, keep in mind that you can, these are the default encryption policies that are built into vCenter out of the box. You can create your own storage policies for encryption as well. So keep that in mind. If you have any special circumstances for that, you can go in and create your own storage policy. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the host and clusters. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to right-click on the core-01A virtual machine under the 01A vCenter server. And then we're going to click on VM policies, and then we're going to go to edit VM storage policies. As you can see by default, obviously we haven't encrypted anything yet, so when we bring up and we get to this stage in the game, it's just on the default policy that's in there. We go ahead and click that drop down, and we're going to see the VM encryption policy that we can select. But first, what I want to do is click on the configure per disk option in the upper right-hand corner. You just click on it, and the slider will go across and turn green. Just to show you real quick, this is one of the improvements from 6.5 to 6.7. In 6.5, we were only able to encrypt the entire VM and all its contents, its home folder, as well as all the VMDKs associated to that particular virtual machine. So everything. It was an all or nothing. Now in 6.7, what we've done is once you select that, now what we can go in and do, and depending on what we want, you know, we may not want to do the whole VM. There could be, if we have multiple VMDK files on this particular VM, but maybe, say, one of the VMDK files is where a SQL database is, and we only want to encrypt that, but not the C drive. It's not necessary. We can go in and select the individual VMDK files, or we can select just the home file, or you can do it all. So we've given you that option now to where you can kind of selectively go in and say, well, I only want to do this one VMDK file or these couple. So you have an option there. Go ahead and turn that off. Again, just did that just to show. And we're going to go ahead and select the VM encryption policy. Click OK. Now, it might be a good idea to go ahead and maximize the recent tasks. It should do it really quick because it's a really tiny VM. It's powered off. But just in case, let's make sure that it completed with a green check mark. Anybody have that not happen to where they're showing an error of any type, where it did not encrypt it? Okay. Anybody that had that happen, go back into where we set up the key management server and double check to make sure that you got all 3 green check marks associated. Typically, if you're getting any type of errors on encrypting a VM, it's probably because there's something up with the trust between the vCenter and the KMS, so you need to go back and validate that.
Or it could be because it's powered on.
Oh, yes. Very good point. Thank you. Yes. Right now, obviously, in order to encrypt a VM, it has to be powered off. Obviously, you don't want to be encrypting a VMDK file while it's running and changes are being made. So it has to be powered off in order to encrypt or decrypt a VM.
So I just tried to encrypt app 01A, and you can see it threw an error here. And if you read it says, very small and tiny, the attempted operation cannot be performed in the current state, powered on. So it gives you an idea that, oh yeah, I got to power that off to encrypt it. So that was the most complex task of encrypting.
Really, there's not much to it at all. One thing to mention also, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead of you, or if you just want to cover it real quick about Encrypted V Motion. Let me just mention, also we have Encrypted V Motion now. Now, a couple of aspects of it. If a VM is already encrypted and then you go and vMotion that particular VM, it will automatically use Encrypted V Motion during the process, okay? There's nothing special that you have to do really with Encrypted V Motion. You can also, if the VM is not encrypted, let's say you have an example where, normally you don't need to have it encrypted at rest. But, maybe I'm moving this VM out to a cloud environment and I'm going across a normal, just a normal internet connection, and I want to be a little more secure and I want that communication and that vMotion to be encrypted. You can turn on VM encryption even though the VM is not encrypted and only do just encrypted vMotion. Now, when that happens, the actual host creates a one-time certificate, and it uses that for the encrypted vMotion process, and then once that vMotion process is done, that gets thrown away. So every time it does encrypted vMotion, it's just creating a temporary key, using it to do it. Once the vMotion is completed, it dumps that key. Yes, sir? That gets into...
Repeat the question for the folks.
Yeah, sorry. For the people online, his question was, if you're obviously doing backups and then you've encrypted a VM, how do you deal with that? You do have to work with a vendor that handles encryption from a backup perspective. So you do have to get into an aspect of making sure that you're using a vendor that can do encrypted VM backups and restores. So you can't just use any old backup solution when doing encryption. Off the top of my head, I don't know, to be honest with you. I haven't really looked at the compatibility chart for that. But like anything else, just like with our what KMS server you use to do vSphere encryption, we have out on our site, we have a compatibility list that shows you the vendors that are compliant. And every time we have any type of update, like with update 1 coming out, sometimes vendors get added, sometimes they get taken off. So obviously, any type of compatibility list, you always want to make sure that if you're updating either your third-party software or your vSphere, you want to make sure that you're checking that to make sure that everything's is compatible.
Sure. A couple of things to really think about when we're backing up those. Your key management server is now a critical component of your backup infrastructure. You need to have that in place because we need to make sure that the certificate that you have, if you lose that certificate, it's like losing your keys to your car with a fob these days. You're kind of going to be out of luck. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you work with your backup vendor and your key management vendor and VMware to make sure that all those are compatible across all of that infrastructure. And so it raises the backup level a little bit more, but again, that's something that typically encryption isn't driven from an operational perspective. We at VMware have tried to make this encryption pretty easy. I think we just showed how painless it is from an operational perspective. Security really drives these requirements. And so from a security perspective, if they're driving that and you need to make some changes on the backup and add something on the backup vendor, you got to work with your security guys to say, hey, you're causing some operational headache here, and this is what we have to do to remediate it. And they have a bigger budget than IT combined with operations and capital. If it's a security thing, they're driving it. Especially PCI compliance is where I see a lot of encryption being driven these days. And in healthcare, HIPAA, all those sorts of things. So that's where I see a lot of that, and the security guys tend to drive it. It's not typically, I don't think I have an end user coming up to me and saying, can I encrypt my VM, please? It's usually security saying, I need this group encrypted because the auditors need it.
Also, a side note, I usually get in a little more deep in my workshop because, again, it's totally focused on the security aspect. But just real quick, if you think about it, we're now encrypting our VMs, okay? When you're using a KMS server, never deploy just one. You always need to deploy at least 2. You need to have a high availability type of setup for your KMS, because think about it. If I only have one KMS server that's handing out certificates and allowing me to encrypt and decrypt, what happens if that KMS server blows up? Now I have a bunch of VMs that are encrypted and I have no way to decrypt them. So now you've got a bunch of data that you don't have access to in a VM that you can't get access to. So whenever you're using KMS doing encryption, you always need to do a highly available KMS type of clustered configuration. And then kind of going back to with backup, or if you're talking from like a DR perspective where I've got another site that I'm doing my DR to, it's best practice is basically to have a live running additional KMS server in that backup environment so that in case your KMS servers are, if you're hard down at your primary site and you're failing over, that way you have a KMS server that's there and ready so that you can encrypt and decrypt appropriately as needed. Yes, ma'am. The question is, she has 3 data centers, and would we recommend putting a KMS server in each one of those locations? And clustering them together? Yes. In my workshop, I actually had the high trust guy with me, and he's really good at getting into the details of that. But essentially, yes, best practice is you're going to want to have at least, you're going to want to have high availability in your primary, and then if your other sites are more like secondary and DR, then you're going to want to at least have 1 KMS server at those sites, and preferably always hot running if possible, because that way, specifically with high trust, they actually replicate between each other. So when we've installed and created the trust with these 2 KMS servers, if I change something, if I go actually into the user interface of the KMS server, change something, that change gets immediately replicated over to the other one. So yes. So just keep in mind that from a VMware perspective, we have high ability and everything else, but don't forget on the KMS side that you need to do the same thing. Otherwise, you could, get yourself into trouble. So, not sure how further you wanted to go.
Let's just talk about the
Okay,
compliance.
gotcha. So as we're clicked on the core 01A under the Vcenter 01A, if you look on the right-hand side, you're going to have to scroll all the way down more than likely. You're going to see the VM storage policies widget there. Right now, since we've encrypted this VM, we should see that it has the VM encryption policy attached to it, and that it is compliant with the green check mark. Okay. Keep in mind, like I said, you can also use Power CLI for all of this stuff to check all of this as well. And in the 04 lab that I do, I actually have you, when you're doing the Power CLI commands, I actually have you come back to the UI to actually validate that what you're seeing in the Power CLI command line saying that it's encrypted, that it's also encrypted here. Yes, sir.
Sorry, quick question. It shows a last check date. How often?
Yes.
Yeah, how often is
How often is the pull? I believe it's every 60 minutes. I'll have to double check on that, but that's what's in my
Yeah.
brain. I'm not sure about 6.7 if they've made that quicker or not. When you make a change to a security, sorry. The question for those online is the compliance. When was it last checked, and does it do it automatically? I think is and what's that refresh rate? When you make a change, it will happen automatically and check the compliance. After that, it will do it on a regularly scheduled interval. I believe it's every hour. All right.
Timeline. Okay. Yes, sir. Okay, his question is basically, can we encrypt multiple VMs at one time? And his specific example was talking about, if I have a VApp with a bunch of VMs in it, can I just go to the VApp level and encrypt them all? You can do multiple VMs at one time. However, I would not recommend it. Or I would selectively recommend it. Because here's the thing, depending on the type of VM, does this VM have a 400 gig drive? Does it have 4 400 gig drives? Obviously, the larger the VM and the more VMDKs it has, the longer it's going to take to encrypt that. Even though it is powered off, it still has to encrypt that drive. So the bigger it is, the longer it's going to take. So as a general rule, I recommend as you start encrypting, decrypting your VMs, you're going to get a kind of a sense of, hey, this VM is this size, and it takes about this long, because keep in mind, it also depends on your infrastructure. You know, what kind of servers do you have? What kind of compute power do you have behind it? All of that will affect it, and it'll be different for everybody in each individual VM. So I would start off very selectively doing one at a time. As time goes on, and if you're encrypting and decrypting them a lot, and you get a feel for, hey, this one takes this much time, this one takes this much time, then I would say, okay, if you know, I can do these two together and it won't bog down the system. And that's why I recommend being very selective, at least initially, because if I go and select 10 VMs, and these are large VMs, and I say encrypt them, you might hammer your vCenter server and just kind of bog down your environment a little bit, and you don't want to do that if possible. Was there another question?
Yeah, go ahead. Enterprise Plus. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's an Enterprise Plus feature. Encryption is Enterprise Plus. Just to go back to just the overhead, and again, your mileage is going to vary based on the CPU, but also the impact can be minimal. As we saw here in the lab, it was pretty small. Just think about how much traffic you've got. It's CPU intensive. It's really not. It can be on larger VMs. It also can impact your storage. So you would want to monitor those two things to see what the actual impact on the environment is. And so you're talking about the licensing implications. So the feature is there in Vcenter from a capability. It gets turned on with the Enterprise Plus license. Is it functional with SRM? Yes. And I'm going to put a little asterisk around it because you're going to have a specific version of SRM. You're going to have look at the compatibility matrix and make sure that that feature with your version of SRM is correct. If you're using one from 3 years ago, it may not be. All right, let's see where we're going next. I think we're done here.
Next thing was just to unencrypt it. So just real quick, this will take a second to do. So let's go back to that Core 1A VM under the 01A vCenter. We're going to right click. We're going to go to the VM policies and again go to edit VM storage policies. And basically to unencrypt, we're just doing the exact opposite of what we did to encrypt it originally. So now what we would do is we go back to that default, default data store there, and then click OK. And again, we'll want to validate either looking at the recent tasks and then or else going down the VM storage policies widget. So in this case, on ours, it completed successfully. And we can validate that we have no longer an encryption storage policy attached to that particular VM there. You will see that you'll still have that green check mark as compliant because technically it is compliant because it's compliant with the default policy now instead of the VM encryption policy. Okay. What we'll want to do then, if we're doing the Encrypted V Motion, actually go ahead and right click on the Core-01A VM again. Go to Edit Settings. And go to VM Options. And then we're going to click the arrow next to Encryption. Gotta love demos. Okay, as you see here, there's two options. There is the Encrypt VM option, and there's also the Encrypted V Motion. I think I mentioned earlier that Encrypted V Motion is just, again, there's nothing special about it other than really selecting the Encrypted V Motion. In my lab, I basically tell you, I can show you how to do V Motion, but there's really nothing to show you. It's just, instead of doing a standard unencrypted V Motion, we're now encrypting it during that process. So there's really nothing to show you that I can show you that, hey, it's encrypted while it's V Motion, unless I had like a packet sniffer or something like that. But you'll see here under the Encrypted V Motion, we have three options. We have disabled, opportunistic, and then we have required. Disabled, obviously it says, you know, just don't do Encrypted V Motion. Opportunistic, if your hosts on both ends from where you're starting to do your vMotion from and who the host that you're vMotioning to is set up with the KMS server. It's trusted and it's set up for encryption. Opportunistic means if it's good on the other side, then we'll go ahead and encrypt the VM. But if for some reason you're vMotioning it to a host that is not set up with KMS and for encryption, then it will not do encrypted vMotion. Okay, and then required, of course, it just says every vMotion on this particular VM has to be encrypted vMotion. So in that case, if required is selected and you're looking to migrate in vMotion to a host that's not set up with KMS and encryption and everything else, then it will not be able to do that because you have set to required. Yes, sir. There's really not a lot of overhead from what I understand. Not enough to, now if you were maybe encrypting a bulk number of VMs, you probably would see a little bit of a hit, but otherwise there's really not much of an overhead for it. Yeah, it's really almost not, just totally not worth worrying about it really. Not unless you're really kind of on the brink of edge from a pipe standpoint, then you may be a little more concerned and you'd want to be selective. Okay. Well, sort of. So to go through the process, if we're going to do an encrypted vMotion, we're going to right-click on it and go to Migrate. And then we do change both compute as well as the storage. And then we're going ahead and select the compute source. So I believe Core 01A should be on the 01 server. Yeah, you're in the wrong one there. Yes. So select ESX02A, and we'll find out real quick because it'll give you the green check mark in the bottom. No, we're not doing cross vCenter. No. Make sure you get that green check mark on the bottom. Yeah, no problem. I know, getting crossed between labs. Yes. Then we're just going to go ahead and change the encryption there. Click Next. And go ahead and click Next for the networking. Yes. Yeah, always look to make sure that it says completed successfully. Now in the labs, normally I know in my lab I didn't have you actually do the vMotion because frankly you're not really seeing anything. Like I said, it just means that now it's encrypted vMotion, so you're not really seeing anything. So in the lab environment, so you can just cancel that. You don't have to actually go ahead and click to do the vMotion. But I just put those steps in there to make sure that somebody knows how to go through it. And basically that, hey, it's the same as doing a normal vMotion, just now it's encrypted, basically. It's partially, that's another way. These lab environments, because we doubly nest a lot of the VMs and everything else, it sometimes puts some limitations on what we can do, and it causes little nuance problems like this. In a production environment, obviously, you're not going to have that happen unless there's an issue.
Now that we've pretended to do one migration, we'll actually do a cross vCenter vMotion, and we can show something very similar with the same thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to start the migration wizard again on Core 01A. And to get there, we're in Module 5, and we're going to go to Start the Migration Wizard. It's step 185 for those folks who are on the live stream at home. And again, we're going to go on to Core 01A, right-click on it. We're going to go to Migrate. And we're now going to change both the compute resource and storage. Now we're going to select the resource to go over to region B. And you can select either ESX01B or 02B. Either one is good. You'll notice compatibility checks, again, passed, so they succeeded. Now, if we were running this and we wanted to change encryption and the KMS servers are different, this is where you would see an error because you don't have the same KMS keys. So if we had an encrypted Core 01A and tried to send it across to Core 01B, we have two different KMS servers, two different KMS clusters. It would tell us, hey, you can't do that. But what we can do is we can actually encrypt it before it even lands. And that's what we'll do in the next step here. So it's going to ask us which storage we're going to do. Select the only storage available, which is the iSCSI in region B. We're going to put it just in region B01 for the virtual machine migration. Now, because we've gone into a different zone, it's also going to be on a different network. You can select the VM-region B01. And again, that's a virtual distributed switch over on the other side. You'll notice now we've got all of that. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually have told us to use an encryption policy when we actually migrate it. And therefore, when I encrypt it across going, so if let's say I have one vCenter with no encryption and another vCenter with encryption, I can actually select the storage policy at the migration time so that it will match up. Just click on Finish, and you'll notice immediately, because we're in a lab environment, it moved from our region A all the way across into region B. Our relocate is complete. We can double check on it. We can go down here. We notice there is no VM storage policy. If I had applied the encryption policy here, we could have seen that it got encrypted right in flight, and that would be complete, and away it went. And you can do that right through the migration. So let's just migrate it back. That's not in the lab manual, but we can just migrate it back. And we'll turn on encryption on the way back and see what happens. Of course, it's slow. There we go. You'll notice if I just select the actual cluster itself, if I had DRS enabled, I could just select the cluster. But since in my lab, if I turned on DRS, it would cause havoc in our lab environment. We have it turned off. You have to actually select a host to go to. Now, I'm going to turn on the VM encryption policy right in the migration wizard. We can put it right in region 01A. Select my network again. I'm going to select the VM region 01A for my VDS. I'm going to click Finish. And you'll see it's going to fly back across and go to the other one. Let's click on our recent tasks. Oh, what happened? Something's not supported on the object. Something must have gone wrong with my... What's this? Yeah, we added the encryption. So try that again. Just make sure my storage policy is the default. Didn't like it. Go migrate. Now we can relocate it. Not sure why the encryption didn't work. It is a lab environment after all. When you try to do things that aren't planned, this is what happens. So, and it worked yesterday when I did it too. So, all right. So I'm just doing a quick time check. We got about 20 minutes left here. Obviously, we have a lot of things in this lab that we can't demonstrate. Enhanced vMotion compatibility, our VMC cloud on AWS, we don't have that access. We do those in other labs. We can't build every feature into every lab. And in this particular one, we have lots of videos. So if you want to take this, you can actually take this not just in our hands-on labs. This lab is live out on our public site. So you can go off, you can take it from your hotel room, listen with your headphones, and look at all the videos that are in there. And if we look, we've got a whole bunch of modules here. Module 1 really talks about all of the various features that we've done, lifecycle operations, all of our embedded link mode, all the information that you would want on all of that is there. Vsphere Quick Boot. Vsphere Quick Boot. How many are you excited about Quick Boot? I would have expected every hand to go up. How many love patches? I love patches, right? Yeah, we all love patches, right? My favorite part of patches is when I reboot my server with a terabyte of RAM and I go for coffee, right? Twice, right? So what we've done with Quick Boot is essentially what we've done is we've worked with our hardware vendors to go with UEFI BIOS boots. And what we do is we essentially just reboot the kernel. And we tell the BIOS that, hey, it's okay. We don't need to do the memory checks and all the rest of that. You guys are still running. You keep running over there, and we'll just do basically a flush of all of the caches in the processor and all the rest of it, and we'll do a quick boot of the kernel. So what would take, how long does it take with a terabyte of memory? 10 minutes? Yeah, 10 minutes. Maybe longer for other boxes that might be older. I had an old server with 256 gigs, and it took 20 minutes to go through the memory count. I don't know why it just did, but it takes a long time for those. So if you imagine you've got 50 servers to patch in a night and you've got to wait 10 minutes on each one of those, you might be around a while, right? So with Quick Boot, 20 seconds, 30 seconds to reboot that kernel. Very fast. If we need to reboot something twice, it's super efficient. It can be still quicker, yeah. So I think that's probably the feature that I've got the most feedback saying that's going to be awesome. Just from an administrator's perspective, from an operational perspective, that is one that's fantastic. Our migration assistant. How many of you used the migration assistant to upgrade your environment? What was your experience with it? Yeah. So the response for those at home was he had an upgrade from 6 to 6.5 that had some issues, but when he used the 6.7 migration tool, it went seamlessly. And I would say that's probably a more common than we would have liked to experience. And I'll explain why. How many VMs are in your environment? It was just a test, so you didn't have thousands? Oh, okay. What I've seen with customers with very large environments, with their database, their vSphere database over 25 gigs, we had an issue where it would take an awfully long time. And it looked like it was timed out, but it was actually importing all your historical data. And it was taking forever and ever and ever to complete that because you had a lot. So what we've done in 6.7 is we've taken that migration tool and we've taken it and broken it into 2 sections. Basically all the important bits, inventory, roles, responsibilities, all that stuff. And then we say, we've completed that, you can now start using Vcenter. Do you want to import the historical data now? Or do you want to do it later? Or do you want to do it at all? And then you can click on that button and you can actually start using your Vcenter. Before you had to wait for everything to complete, and it did cause some issues. But we have fixed all of that in 6.7. The migration tool in update 1 is getting even better. We can now use what we call that, the server configuration migration tool. What was that called in that first slide? I'm just at a loss. At any rate, we can now take your external PSEs and suck them back into an embedded PSE in update 1. So we can do the whole process. Obviously, we have update manager, embedded mode, the embedded link mode. We can support up to 15 vCenters in embedded link mode. Anyone have more than 15 vCenters in the room? 45? You can break them up into 3. It's perfect. Only 2 that are 5.5. Everybody in the room, 5.5 and a general support September 19th. You know, it's kind of looming out there. We do have some customers who have hardware dependencies or maybe an application dependency. We understand that. You can get extended support on vSphere 5.5 for a fee. You can talk to your account teams. I won't mention the number. It's awfully big. Does anyone have any other questions about anything that we presented today or anything in 6.7? Yes, at the back? What are the question was, what are the main differences between the update manager in 6.5 and 6.7? I would say the main difference is that it's in the HTML5 client. So the functionality is already there, but it's now in the HTML5 client. So from an update manager perspective, it's just in the HTML5 client. The question for those on the live stream is, how difficult is the upgrade from 6.5 to 6.7? I would say it should be the easiest upgrade that we've probably ever had. With the migration tool, the database upgrade, we're now using the exact same embedded PSE. We're using the same VCSA, all of those sorts of things. How many are still running the Windows version of Vcenter server? So we got a couple of holdouts. Are you planning on migrating? Because 6.7 is the last version for Windows support. Typically, you might have a plugin from a third-party vendor that's keeping you there. Hopefully, our third-party vendors are now all on board with our new plugin methodologies. Pardon me, what was that? The appliance? Oh, the native, the Flash client? This is the last version that the Flash client, update 1 is the last version for the Flash client to be supported. After that, it's going to be HTML5 all the way. Yeah, absolutely. So here is the caveat on that. If you're on 6.5 update 2 and you want to go to 6.5 or 6.7 without an update, there is no upgrade path for that today. With update 1, you can now upgrade your vSphere 6.5 update 2 to vSphere 6.7 update 1. I know it's a little confusing, but essentially when we update the kernel, we have to have basically the 6.7 kernel was older than the 6.5 update 2 kernel. So we had to wait until we had update 1 out so we could then do that. We had a very similar thing with vSphere 6.7 and update 2 to vSphere 6.5. So we were in that same boat. 6.0 to 6.5. My apologies. All these version numbers are very confusing. So again, 6.7 update 1 was just announced here on the show on Monday. The general release of that is going to be sometime in September. What I've told, I haven't heard the official date yet. And again, fully featured HTML5 is really the really big news in that one. But we also have the Vcenter server Converge tool, which will help external PSEs get back to embedded mode. Lots of vSAN announcements in that as well. vSAN, how many are running vSAN here in the room? We have one. Yes, thumbs up. Easy to manage, right? Every time we come out with a new version of vSphere, we come out with a new version of vSAN. So any updates we have, because vSAN's embedded in the kernel, all the updates flow into there. I won't go through their announcements because they have their own sessions. So, but if we don't have any other questions, thank you all for attending. I hope this was of some value for you guys. You can do the lab out there. We're trying to add a little more information for you guys here in the room. So, thanks, guys.